Well, welcome to Mental Stillness Podcast, and I'm here with a friend of mine, Fred Turner. I'm excited to have him here today. And, I brought him on here, and as I've been having guests come onto the podcast, it's been just really fun hearing different people's stories and experiences and backgrounds. And I've known Fred for several years, and I think he's got experience in a couple of different sectors, and that I thought that we could all learn from. And so, Fred, I'm so glad you're here, man.
I'm glad to be here. We'll find out if it's worth learning from.
Well, I can always delete it.
Yes, you can. That's right.
So I guess for our listeners, I'd love just share a little bit about Fred Turner and who you are and a little bit of your story.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll start closer to the beginning. I grew up in Florida, and we live in Lexington, Kentucky, and there seems to be a conduit for a lot of people between Kentucky and Florida. It's called I-75, right? Yeah. But lived around the state. Probably toward the end of high school, thought I was on a path maybe toward journalism or maybe even sociology. Always been interested in what people do and why they do it. But toward the end of high school, ended up becoming a follower of Jesus. And about a year later, decided to go train to become a pastor, which was never, ever on my radar. And have done that professionally for more than 3 decades. At some point, I realized that what I was really doing was serving people, caring for people, and building leaders. And so for the past few years, I've been working with you at Lead Every Day, and in another setting with the campus ministry, just pouring into leaders. So that's me professionally. Outside of work, I'm married to Jennifer. We're working on year 27 at this point, and have a daughter, Addison, who is a sophomore in college, and a son, Colston, who is a 16-year-old high school junior, and that empty nest is coming faster than I thought it would be, which is probably strange to hear in your season where you got little guys at home. But
I've had a lot of wise people say it's coming, and even just handful of years in, you realize how quick it's going. So one of the things I would love to unpack a little bit is, I know you talked about working in the kind of the church world and the nonprofit world, which, some people in here maybe have been part of a nonprofit or church kind of experience, and some haven't. But, there's a lot of overlap in people are people, and there's, certain goals and ambitions that nonprofits are going after, and same thing with for-profits. And like you said, we get to collaborate and work with some teams and leaders together, which has been fun over the years. And I would love to hear, just from your standpoint, how do you go about, I guess, inspiring, motivating, kind of, here's what we're going after, and how do you get people to kind of engage with that?
So I think it's a great question. I think in the pastoral space, the mission to me was pretty clear from, the Bible, from Jesus, what he's told us to do, to serve people, love people, extend good news, walk alongside people, help them grow. I think the way different church communities choose to incarnate that looks a lot different. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of that vision, for me, I was always asking myself, about context. If I'm serving a local church, where is this church? What's the community like? What are the needs in the community? Who are these folks, right? I'd like to say, like, all fields don't grow the same crops. Mm. And that's a good thing. I think diversity is a beautiful thing. So I think in terms of understanding nuanced vision, it's about context, who you are, who your people are, what the opportunities are. We get to work with a lot of folks who operate in a big franchise kind of context, and they have a corporate mission and a corporate vision and a lot of consistency, and then we get a front row seat watching them all lead differently. And so I think some of it's leading out of who we are. And what we see, or even if we're collaborating on vision, what our team sees. And then, I think you got to get buy-in. Doesn't matter how great your vision is if people aren't excited about it. Yeah. If they're not excited about it, either I'm not communicating it well, or I haven't listened well to know what they might be excited about getting behind.
I feel like sometimes when you're talking about casting vision, so much of, that's the leader's role. You don't want, you want vision coming from the top. You don't want people who are new to the team, or, you don't want them generating vision, because they'll do that if we don't provide that as leaders. Right. And so I guess the casting vision piece mixed with the leader's personality and natural wiring, because I'm sure that how they go about casting the vision, just there's got to be a part of that that's like customized to the personality of the leader at the top. And so I guess from that standpoint, how do you feel like your wiring or your personality has enabled you to do that well? Or maybe are there any challenges as that's presented, whether it's extrovert, introvert, or personality type?
You know, I like what you said, Derek, because I think at times people assume that some people are born leaders or born vision casters or born, or that all leaders are charismatic vision casters. And I think we've had the privilege of watching people lead out of who they are in many different ways. Some people are charismatic, magnetic. Other people are more, they're warm, they're kind. That's probably a little more my wiring. People might, I don't feel like I light up a room, but people feel like I care, genuinely, hopefully.
We'll be the judge of that after this podcast.
That's right. I think we have other people that they're wired to more organize and structure, and when they cast vision, people can see the structure. They're not necessarily charismatic. They might not be warm, but man, you've laid the blueprint out. I could see us building that. And so, I think that's a good thing, that there's not one type of personality or even set of gifts that can be a leader. I do think there's something in what you said, that when you're running a business, when you're leading a nonprofit, you want vision to come from leadership. And I think that the people often help shape that vision, because vision initially can be pretty general. Or we could have had a vision that we were going to flesh out in this way, and then the economy changes, the talent challenge changes, our financial capabilities change. And so, I think vision starts with the leaders, but I also think vision can be a team sport. I'm thinking of a business I serve where kind of the right-hand leader pulled out of the senior leader their vision. And the senior leader said it, but he didn't come down as Steve Jobs at the Apple product drop or Moses from the mountain. Like, his team actually pulled it out of him. And once he spoke it, he's like, oh, there it is. So
they had to mine for it.
Yeah, they mined for it. And it's gold. It's great. It's, one of the best vision statements I've come across recently. But I think as leaders listen to this, they may feel like, man, that's just not my strength. I can't get there. I'm not that lady or that guy. And, I don't know that I am either. But I see lots of people lead in a lot of different ways.
Oh, totally. That vision's got to be authentic to who we are. It's like if he was trying to emulate Steve Jobs, people would see through that and it would feel inauthentic and it wouldn't stick.
Yeah. So I love music, and I'm more rhythmic than musical, probably, right? Play percussion and drums more than things with notes. Drums have notes, but beyond me. So I love listening to songwriters talk about their craft. And one of my favorites says, tell the truth and do it as quickly as you can. And I think you're touching on that. Like, if a vision doesn't resonate with us, if it's not a part of who we really want to be and what we really want to pursue, we may find a way to package it and get it out there. But vision leaks, we've heard said a lot. And wanting to do the hard work of continuing to refresh vision every day, multiple times a day, I think it's going to feel tedious if we're not bought in.
For leaders listening, I think there's some really good points in there of wisdom. I don't want to fly past. I would say really what he said around fighting for vision. So if you don't have vision and you're in a position to where maybe you're not at the top of the organization, but you're near the top, how can you prioritize conversations with your supervisor or the owner or whoever that is to be like, hey, this is something that I'm sensing that not only I need, but the organization needs. Can we have a conversation on that, or can I help come alongside you? And how do we bring about clarity? What do we need to do to get the rest of the organization more clarity so we can get more buy-in and more engagement? So I think there's a lot of good in that. Also, leading from a place of authenticity. And so I think the temptation is often to see someone else who maybe has the same role on paper and be like, well, I have to look like them to be successful. And it's like, well, maybe you were put in that position because you were not like them, and you have some things that you bring to the table. So from a place of authenticity and just kind of the more internal world for you as a leader. So I would love to hear again, whether it's in church, nonprofit, or the for-profit space, whenever you see, man, I know that this very thing would help them in their situation, and it's so clear to you, maybe it's so clear to other people, but they, for whatever reason, don't see it, they're resisting. How do you serve them well, but also not feel like you're the one that's going to have to carry them to that thing?
Mm-hmm. That's good, man. It's funny. There are a lot of ways we could go with that, because I think it's a theme that comes up for both of us as we work with leaders and coach, right? One of the things that I've learned being out in the marketplace for the last few years, doing a lot of coaching, I've learned that giving people feedback that is for their good, that's well-intentioned, that's seasoned with kindness, right, and truth, both, I think we really need to reframe that as an act of care. Because, when we, in the work that we do, we talk about valuing both results and relationships, and that people have a natural leaning. And I think sometimes our results-oriented people they're quick to have the feedback, but they don't deliver it with the kindness. But our relational people, they're hesitant to deliver the feedback because they think it's going to hurt the relationship. And that's probably more my natural wiring. I'm fighting to balance both. But as I started to think about points of feedback as an act of care, if I genuinely have your good interest at heart, and I know that something you're doing or not doing is sabotaging the things you really want in life and where you want to go and the impact you want to have, if I care about you, I'll say something. Somebody challenged me with the idea that when we withhold feedback that would help somebody, we may think we're being kind, but we're just being nice to ourselves because we don't want to have the hard conversation, right? So I think there's that example of, man, I can see it. A question I ask all the time when somebody says, hey, I've got a team member, I've got a leader under me, I've got a leader over me, here's what's going on. I say, has anybody given them that feedback? And it's about 50-50, like, nope, we're not talking to them, we're talking about them, right? And then sometimes it's yes, they have been given that feedback. So if we're not given the feedback, at least from my wiring, it's asking myself, do I really genuinely care for them? Enough that I'll be uncomfortable so that they at least have an opportunity to consider what could be. I think there's another way to go with your question. If somebody has been given the opportunity, given the feedback, given the challenge, and they're not doing anything with it, and we're like, man, if you would just start showing up on time, if you would just take more ownership, if you would be a little more detail-oriented, if you would just follow through, right? If you would just breathe before you speak, whatever it is. I think that's where we have to distinguish, like, the ownership issue. It's not my issue to own. It's their life. They get to choose. And, I think it helps to look at ourselves, and it helps me to remember I've been slow to change at times, or I had my own process. Like, I tend to think about process a lot. So, a part of their process may be sitting with this for a while. And they may look back and say, man, I wish I'd done that sooner. But I think even that's a part of how we grow. Is thinking, man, I wish I'd opened that retirement account 10 years earlier. I wish I'd have had that conversation 6 months sooner. I wish I'd have, popped that question to get married earlier. And that's just a part of growth to me.
Or later.
Or later, or never, or I don't know.
So I love the reclassifying or redefining feedback as an act of care. And I know for the people listening that maybe lean more, and it's all about the relationship side. I know sometimes that can be a really good self-check as you're on the fence, because I feel like sometimes the relationship people, if they sit with feedback long enough, they can justify reasons why not to give it. It's almost like if you feel like you need to say something, okay, in that moment, if I can capture and tell myself, like, this is hard, I'm not looking forward to this meeting, but this is the most caring thing I can do. You tap into the relationship side, even when it doesn't feel like that at face value.
Can I tag on to that?
Absolutely.
So I think, if somebody's listening is wired a little bit more like me, naturally, relationally driven, having to lean harder toward results to focus on that, you don't have to do it alone. right? You can leverage your relational wiring and find a friend and say, hey, I know I need to have this conversation with my boss or a client or a team member. I'm convinced I need to do it today, but next week I might find a reason not to. So I want you to ask me if I've had the conversation, right? So, you know, I think a part of being a leader is just knowing we don't do it alone. And so get support, right? If that's what I need, then I'm going to ask for it and say, I'm talking a good game now that I'm going to go in and I'm going to tell her, and but hey, the next time we have coffee, I want you to ask me, did you do it?
I'm inviting you to give me feedback.
That's right.
Or accountability.
Yeah. Or maybe they'll say, hey, text me when you've had that conversation. If I don't get a text in the next day or two, I'm going to follow up.
So I guess one question I have is, when you think about if you're a pastor on a stage, you're mic'd up, you're under a spotlight, the room lights are dimmed, you know, a lot of eyeballs. What's pastor got for us today? You know,
no expectation.
No expectation.
Right? Yeah.
If you're a coach, you know, there's this mentee coach dynamic. It's, you know, if you're a high level leader, you might be sitting towards the top or at the top of the org chart. So there's an inherent hierarchy in all those camps. And so from a leadership lens of, you and I have both been in those different realms. How do you lead from a place of confidence and make sure it doesn't transition slowly or quickly into arrogance?
That's a great question. And it's probably the question a lot of folks ask when they see abuses of power in leadership, right? Or, you know, whether it be church or government or business, or I think it's an embedded question, like, can it be both and? Can somebody lead from a place of confidence and taking responsibility for the role they've been asked to carry, but do it humbly and with a heart to serve and not for themselves, right? So, okay. So for those that might have a faith background or they're a part of a church community, and by the way, I hope there are a lot of people listening who don't, because right, that's not really the focus of this work in this podcast. So my approach as a pastor, and I might be weird in this, I might be the only one. I don't think so. In fact, I know I'm not. My approach was always, this is not my church. Like, my name's not on the sign. You know, I told a few church communities I served, like, Jesus already died for this church. He's not asking me to do that, right? So in the church world, it was remembering, like, this isn't me. Like, this, I've been asked to play a part. I've been trusted with responsibility, and I want to shepherd and steward that well. And I think even if you're a person with zero faith, chances are the same is true for you wherever you lead. Like, everybody has a boss, right? You know, even people who start their own businesses because they want to be in total control, look up and there's the government giving them regulations and asking for money back and assessing fees and wanting licensures. And so I think it just helps to remember everybody has a boss. My view is, no matter where you fit in the org chart, and often those do look like a hierarchy, I don't think anybody's any better or more important than anybody else. You know, I tell leaders all the time, and I tried to live this way and still try to live this way, that there's no task that's beneath me. I can take out trash. I can scrub toilets, you know, and have many times. Those might not be the best use of my time every single day. So I think when we're thinking hierarchy, we're not thinking more important. We're thinking different levels of responsibility. I have a dear friend, he's the only person I know to credit this to, who says, and he leads an organization full of young leaders, and he says to them all the time, as you ascend the ladder of leadership, you descend the ladder of rights. And never heard it put that way, but I think it's right. Like, when you're at the bottom, post whatever you want on social media. When you're at the top, you can't afford to do that. When you're at the bottom, you leave a little early. People might notice, they might not. When you're at the top and you're leaving early all the time, people are noticing. So, and then I would say beyond that stuff, like, you know, I think the vision of leadership and the model of leadership that I resonate with is the one that Jesus presented, which I see lived out in a lot of places in corporate America today too. It's not just a religious thing, but it's the model of servant leadership. You know, I didn't come for my own good. I came for other people's good. In corporate world, we talk about I'm here to add value. I'm here to set others up for success. I'm here to help other people win, all the same thing. So I think when I remember that my ultimate purpose is about them, then what am I going to be proud about? You know, I'm here for them. I was on a phone call with 2 young leaders before we're taping, and I'm learning from them, right? So I think that's another bias for me. It's like we're never done learning. We always can get better. And so I think those are probably a few of the things. That servant leader mindset, constant growth. Hey, this isn't who I'm not a pastor. I was asked to fulfill the role of a pastor. It's a role that I've been asked to take on. It's not my identity in an unhealthy way.
To me, there's it's so much of a proactive mindset. I love what you said, like on the front end when you went to serve a church or community, it's like, my name's not on the sign. It's not, this is not how I operate. And I guess the part in there too is like having the posture of servanthood. Like there's something that's extremely disarming about that. So I would just say this to leaders listening, like if when you think about some of the great leaders in history that really stand out, that people still talk about, they still write about, man, a lot of those people were servant leaders. They maybe weren't the most attractive, the most famous or most rich or whatever. It's like there's this element of like, man, it's hard to look at someone that's genuinely servant leading and to have an issue with that. I think a lot of people are drawn towards that.
Yeah.
And so I would just say for you in your leadership position, like, where can you serve? Where can you step in and operate in that way?
Yeah. Where could you show up today and just ask those, whether they're your customers, your clients, your guests, or your employees, your team, your leaders, how can I help? Yeah. What can I do to make your life easier today? I think is the essence of that question.
Let's say that we're talking to some people who, some of our listeners may be more on the extroverted end of the spectrum, and
love those folks.
Me too. Say they're going up to, it's easy for them to go up and ask that very thing and say, hey, what about the ones that are a little bit more introverted? And maybe servant leadership sometimes makes them lean more into extroversion than their home base of introversion. So what would you say, I guess, speaking from your vantage point, if you can share a little bit of where you feel like you land on that introversion, extroversion, that awareness, how do you step in and lead from that place, even if it sometimes feels a little bit more challenging because of where you land on that?
That's great, man. I think we could go a lot of ways with that. I think wiring is a topic I'm passionate about. What I see over and over again is people are just running their operating systems. They don't think, today I want to be introverted, or today I want to be whatever. They're just living out their wiring. So I can't tell you how many times I've gotten feedback about somebody and, man, here are their real challenges. We just can't get them to do these things. And then we do an assessment or two, and I'm like, well, that's because you're asking them to do what's completely counter to their wiring. And it doesn't mean they can't do it. It doesn't mean we're stuck. It just means it's going to take a lot more effort. And our ceiling's probably lower. Like the ceiling's lower for an introvert to work the room than for an extrovert, right? Doesn't mean they can't, but it's going to take a lot more energy. It's going to take a lot more willpower. And they may never be as good as somebody who's a born introvert or born extrovert, right? So what I've learned about myself is I test pretty much on the border. Like I'm almost 51 or 52%. And I tend to test just extroverted, and I would credit that to 30 years of having a job where I showed up and talked to people, right? You're better at mental stillness and mental health than I am for sure. My understanding of introversion, extroversion is not, do you like people or not? It's, do they take energy from you or do they give you energy? So you're tired. Do you want to go to a party? Or do you want to sit on the couch and lock the door and just be with your tribe maybe? Or for me, it's going on a hike in the woods, right? When I'm tired, my first thought is never, how do I get around a whole bunch of people? And for those leaders out there who have this vision of most leaders are extroverts, I would tell you that's not the case of the folks I work with. I work with plenty of people who are engaged, caring, energizing. People are like, man, I like them. And when we talk, it's like, oh, they're introverts. And they can have that great day. They can lead that team meeting. They can show up for their clients. They can have a great morning at church. And then they go home and take a nap, which is what I used to do, right? And it doesn't mean I didn't love every conversation, every interaction. It just meant I needed time to recover. I think a part of the question you're asking is how are we free to just be ourselves, not be limited by saying, well, I'm just this, I can't learn or grow or change or get better, but then also not feel like, man, I'm looking at somebody in my business and that guy's super extroverted and I'm a lady maybe who's very introverted. Well, he's succeeding, therefore I can't. No. Like, I think almost anybody can succeed with different wiring.
You may see another introvert that's a little different than you, and you're like, well, I must be an extrovert. Well, no, maybe you're just a different introvert, right? And so there's different ways. And like you said, some people may be introverted and they do need to go take a nap. I know some people who they just need to go sit in the middle of the woods. It's not sleep.
Right. It's not always sleep.
That's not the
get re-energized with whatever energizes you.
So is it, I know you're big into hiking. I know that recharges your batteries too. So I guess broadening your own definition of extrovert and introvert is helpful too as a leader to know. Step one is know where on that spectrum I am, but then also who you're leading. Like you need to know if I'm the leader and I'm trying to get us from point A to point B, with my part of the organization, you're going to do that better if you know where your people are. So then you can craft your message where they're at versus my way or the highway. Here's what I have to say. You guys figure that out based on where you're at. No, it's like I need to come alongside them and say, hey, I know this is going to maybe put you out of your comfort zone. So how can I speak into that in my coaching of them and inspire them that way so they feel seen? Right. And also I provide a little bit of clarity that.
Which, I mean, goodness, if we want to talk for hours, you can even take that down to, hey, as you're building your team, if you've got a leadership team of 3 or 4 people and they're all introverts, well, maybe your next hire, if all things were equal, should be an extrovert to add that to your team, right?
And see that as a blessing, not that's the black sheep.
Yeah, so not only when I do coaching, I explore people's wiring, but if I'm working with a team, I'll encourage them to then share their results with each other and note, and not only personality, but strengths and challenges and weaknesses. What I tell leaders all the time, like, be glad people have strengths you don't, because if they've got a strength you don't have, you can borrow it. You can say, I'm really bad at hard conversations, you're really good. Would you sit with me? Could I sit and watch you do that a couple times? Or, man, I'm not creative, but you are. Could we brainstorm a new product line? And so, I think the approach I take is, man, I'm glad when I work with people who aren't just like me, because that means we have more options.
Yeah. We're putting a new fence up at our house, and it's like, I've realized I need more than just a hammer. I may or may not have had to use the Sawzall the other day to undo maybe a poor panel that I hung, and so
you might need a level.
You might need, right? I definitely need a level. 6-foot level, but then also realize that one's too big for something. I also need the 6-inch level.
That's right.
And so just the nuance and the variety is like, man, that's what a team should be and feel like, and not. I think sometimes you and I have walked in organizations and I think they're struggling, but I think it's also they have a really small view of, they're seeing other people's uniqueness as they're not a good fit versus, hey, maybe they're just wired differently, and that's really good, because sometimes you might need that Sawzall, and so seeing people in that kind of way I think is helpful.
I think you're naming, for me, you're making me remember another challenge that a lot of leaders face. And I don't know how to fix this for people. I wish I could fix it for me. What you just said about the nuanced, contextualized approach to leadership, that takes a lot of thought and time and energy. And in a lot of businesses I work with, people are so busy running the business, or we would say they're working in the business, that they don't set aside the time to work on the business. They don't set aside the time to think, how do I lead these people differently? Yeah. And so I think sometimes our approach is one size fits all, because that's all we think we can manage. And that, I think, is a real challenge that a lot of leaders deal with. And yet, I think more than ever, people are expecting more out of their leaders. Yeah. They're looking for value at work, not just from the paycheck, but do you care about me? Do you value me? Do you see what I could bring? Will you take the time to communicate with me in the way that I need to be able to understand? And so, again, it could be 4 more podcasts probably, but what do you do when running your business takes all your energy, and you need probably as much time to think about how to lead the leaders in your business.
A lot of times that means saying no to some things, and obviously like the temptations to probably jump in and deal with that day-to-day thing. But if you do that day in and day out, there's always going to be the day-to-day stuff, right? And so how do you position yourself and have that team around you where they can pick up some of that, so then you can kind of be thinking more long-term.
And how do you release it and let it go? Yeah. How do you delegate? How do you deputize? How do you see that? I was talking with a young leader this morning, and he said to me, I only delegate what I don't have time to take care of myself. And I said, man, I appreciate your work ethic, but you're robbing people of opportunities to get better and grow and advance. Yeah. You need to see this as a win for you, that now you have time to do other things, but it's also a win for them.
Yeah.
I had a senior leader in a $10 million business. I was sitting at a table with them, and senior leader looked at the owner and said, I got better when you were here less. And it wasn't a criticism. It was, when you gave me more responsibility, I grew.
Yeah.
But as long as you were here handling it all, my development and growth was stunted. I couldn't add value to your business because you were busy adding all the value.
Yep. I think with leaders listening, like you use that word delegate, and it's such a lot of different definitions of delegation. And especially if you've been on the receiving end of an unhealthy leader, delegating is dumping or the nemesis of servant leadership. It's like, this is beneath me.
Yes.
It's not beneath you. You do this.
Yes.
I had an internship early on where the first place I went into, like, I found out real quick that, I needed to get used to mopping the floors. Like, legitimately, they had a gym floor out, and it was absolutely because no one else there. They all felt like they had beyond that point. So, here's the intern. Here, come spend your summer to do this. And so I got really good at mopping. I guess with delegation, just a couple anecdotal observations. And I don't know, I would love, based on your experience, you may add to these, you may challenge these. I'm very open to this. But I think that, a few things that come to mind that I think are true enemies of delegation are time, which you mentioned that earlier. It's like, I don't have the time to sit and plan out. So therefore I get in reactivity mode, or, where I'm just responding every day. It's like,
or it'll take me longer to teach you than to do it myself. I've said those words.
Absolutely. I'll just do it myself.
Yes, it'll save time.
I think the temptation, another temptation of it is, these are going to be 3 T's, by the way, just so I can remember them myself. So,
you sure you're not a pastor today?
Yeah, exactly.
Lining it all up?
Exactly. So time, I think the second one is trust. It's like, if I do hand this thing over, if I do delegate this thing, there's going to be a sacrifice on quality, because I've spent years doing this. Good. And so it's really a matter of trust. It's like, you could delegate. I'm choosing not to because I don't trust you. I'm not going to tell you that. Maybe.
Can I speak into that, or do you want to finish the
third?
No, go for it. Will you remember the third T?
I got it. So, because it's a T, I'll remember it.
Something I've realized and have tried to say to leaders and try to mine and learn for myself is that when we're comparing how Derek is going to do with how Fred is going to do, we're often comparing how Derek is going to do after 5 years of experience doing this thing with how Fred's going to do on day one. Yeah. We're not comparing how Derek did day one doing this thing with where Fred's at now.
Different scorecards.
Right? And so I think that's a part of it. Like, it's like, well, hey, you've been doing this marketing thing for 5 years. They won't be as good as you are at 5 years in, but they might be a lot better than you were at day one. And then it's still a win, right? I mean, what's the stat we say or hear? If somebody can do it X percent as good as you can, 70, 80 or numbers I hear, let them do it if you have other priorities.
Yeah, I love that. That trust piece it's an active choice. You got to choose. Go ahead on the front end and say, I'm going to delegate this, and I'm going to be okay with the quality looking different. Because again, from what you just said, it's a way that you can get it off your plate and focus on something else that needs to happen that hasn't been happening probably. It also is going to allow them to level up their leadership and give them opportunity. And if people didn't trust us, those skills that we're talking about would never have grown. And so think of it through your lens of where you're at versus how many people trusted you to get you where you're at, and how many people are you preventing from getting there because you don't trust them. And so time, trust, I think the third one speaks a little bit more to the mental side. I think it's territorial. I think there's an element of people who don't delegate because this thing I'm about to give over to you has been so ingrained in my role. It's been so ingrained in me that it's become part of my identity to where, man, I'm kind of known as this in the organization. I'm known as the tech person. I'm known as the
idea guy or lady.
Yeah, like, and that feels good. So I walk in a room, there's an expectation from others that, oh, here's the field expert on said issue. And that really does, that taps into all of us want to feel connected. All of us want to feel competent.
Yes.
I'm about to hand something over that I've really relied on for connecting with people and for helping people and for feeling like I'm adequate and competent and that I belong. And so I think delegations, like when you strip away some layers, like it can get to that spot. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on the territorial one, but
so I wasn't sharp enough to come up with the T that you did on territorial, but the word that came to mind is it's often about our pride. It's about what am I known for, but it's also about if they do it differently than I do and it's better, what does that say about me? And I think, I say all the time to folks, and as a non-mental health professional, this is probably a sloppy way to say it. You would say it much better than I would. That's just a human thing. Now, there are plenty of human things I need to fight against because all human things aren't good and don't lead people to flourish and don't bless people or bless myself. But I think wanting to be capable and wanting to take pride in your work is a human thing. But I think we have to resist that temptation to say, well, what if they reinvent it and it's better? And now everybody's looking at them as the deliverer. Like it's a human thing to want to come through and deliver. But it's not great to want to be the only deliverer. There's a lot in there, man. There's also probably somewhere in there micromanaging comes in. Like I didn't really delegate, maybe because of territory or trust. But I'm actually doing more work on this while you're doing it because I'm checking in all the time, or I had a person say to me, I've got a boss who wants to see us hit a certain number, and they've texted me 10 times today to see where the number's at. Well, the number hasn't moved today. It doesn't move like that. Like,
I guess thinking through the people you're leading, and I don't know if any of those three fit, but I think regardless of where you sit in the organization, if you go from this level to this level, delegation's going away, and I don't have to ever delegate again. You probably need to be more strategic and more thinking of like, what can I offload? Because as you go up, it's fascinating, and I know so many of the listeners will resonate with this. The higher you go up in the organization, the more responsibility, obviously. You've got a lot, the people side of things, but then also your decisions, there's more weight to those of, wow, now this is not going to impact just 3 people on my team over here. It's like, no, now there's 30 people who this is putting food on their family's table, and my decisions carry a lot more weight. And so delegation now is like, okay, if there is a quality drop, I need to process, there's a lot more temptation to hold on to it because the weight of the responsibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you made me think of a conversation I had when I was a pastor. I was having it with my youth pastor, and we were talking about what we were doing with the musical part of Sunday mornings that people would call worship, right? It's just music. And I was just saying, I don't really like what we're doing. And my youth pastor, who was young, said, well, you're the leader. Why are we doing something you don't like? And I said, because I think it's what's best for the church. And, if our vision of leadership is that we're doing what the leader likes and prefers and not what is best for the business, the team, the community, our constituents, whatever your context, then I think weaving together some of our earlier things, like my job as a leader is to make the best decision for everyone as much as I can, not to make the decision that I like the best, right? And I think that goes with delegation. Like, no, I might not want to release this, but I might need to release it because I have other things I have to do.
So I would just throw it there to the listeners, like think of this through the lens of deficiencies in maybe the time, trust, or being territorial. But then also think about who's leading you. Are you on the receiving end of not being trusted? Are you on the receiving end of not being, them giving you the time that you need or the time to really plan? And then the last one is like, do you feel like maybe your supervisor's being a little territorial? So maybe that's a language to frame up a conversation, even if you're more on the receiving end of not in the best place. And so my last question is, I guess I'm really interested in, knowing that we've got listeners in a lot of different industries and also different kind of seasons of life. Any kind of key thoughts or takeaways from 3 decades plus of leadership experience? And I know what I love about you, Fred, too, is you are a constant learner, and there's just a lot in that where you're still figuring stuff out. And I think those are the best leaders, right?
They're the ones I respect the most.
And so, I guess any kind of words of wisdom that come to mind that you think would be helpful for the listeners to hear?
Yeah, you've reminded me of a couple things. One, I think when it comes to leadership overall, to reassert we're never done learning. So part of the leadership work I do is with a nonprofit that works on a major university's campus here in Lexington, Kentucky, and it's with a staff of about 40. My job is to help them grow and develop. Most of them are kind of serving somewhat sacrificially. And so it's really a part of our value proposition is we're going to pour into you and invest in you. And I'm sitting, we're in the summer, no students on campus, so it's a lot of leadership investment in our staff. And we're sitting around, we're reading a book on leadership. And this young man who's about 24, says, man, I can't wait till I'm 30 and I have all this stuff figured out. And I kind of said, well, at the time, I think it was 51. I'm like, well, dude, you'll be 2 decades ahead of me because I'm 51 and still figuring this stuff out. So I think just starting with that expectation that, yes, we figure things out, but then there's always deeper, there's always a deeper place to go. So in the work we do, we teach principles and concepts that we know, believe, have practiced, and then at least once a month, I come up with but I'm not done with that yet. So, I think, so for young leaders, let me frame it up that way. You're never done. For older leaders, I would say just because you've heard it before or done it before doesn't mean there isn't new territory to learn and grow into. And sometimes what I need to hear is not the brand new novel thing I've never heard before. I need to be reminded of, oh, that's right. That is what I want to be about. That is, or have I been courageous and done that thing before? Yeah, but is it time to do it again? Yes, it's time to do it again. Yeah. So, and I, as a person of faith, what I would say is I think that's God's graciousness to us, that he lets us learn at the pace we're ready to learn at, instead of dumping on us and seeing our deficiencies. He lets us make that little bit of progress. If you happen to be a Bible person, there's this thing Jesus says the night before he dies. He says it to his friends, I have more to tell you, but you're not ready for it yet. When the Holy Spirit comes, he'll lead you into the full truth. Mm-hmm. Which I think is God saying, you got growing to do, but you can't do it all at once.
Yeah. I'm not done with you, but you're not ready for this next thing.
That's right. And I think, whether you're a person of faith or not, as leaders, you may see all the different areas your people need to grow in, but you can't do them all at once. So start with what feels either most pressing, most attainable, have your own metric for that, but, just realize we got to do it bit by bit, because as somebody who's been leading for 2 decades, 3 decades, that's how we got there, and we're still not done.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming and just sharing.
Man, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was excited whenever we, started kind of adding some interview portions to this podcast, and you definitely came to mind real quick for a reason. So thanks for your time.
That's kind, man. I'm grateful for you, and love all the ways you're serving leaders by bringing the mental peace, because they deal with it every day.
Yeah.
And I love that you're bringing some help and support that way.
Awesome, man. Appreciate you, man.
Hey, you too.
Thanks.